Okay, so
Okay, so we'll get started, everyone. I'll be very brief here. I'm Bridget Shearer. I'm the Parks and Recreation Director for the City of Belmont. And I'm happy to welcome you all to this really exciting discussion topic this evening. I have the feeling we could probably have a 24-hour webinar about this and still not talk about all the things that we're thinking and questioning and wondering about how Washington works. So we're very pleased to have Eric Saund join us this evening and give us some of the inside scoop to maybe help explain and understand the headlines that we're all reading these days. Before we get started, I just want to do a quick thank you to Susan Rendina, who's there in the Toby room at the library this evening. This Belmont Talk series is her brainchild. She is the volunteer coordinator who's helping our Parks and Rec department provide new and different opportunities for on all sorts of topics for all sorts of folks in the greater Belmont community. So a big thank you to you, Susan, and also a thank you to Cherry and the staff at the Belmont Library for helping to make this possible as an in-person and a virtual event. We're trying to come up with topics that are of interest to the community and make them available and accessible to everyone. That's why we're doing these hybrid meetings and are going to continue that even after we can all meet in person more freely. And all of our talks are also available. They're being recorded and they're available online at the Belmont Park and Rec website for later viewing. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to the folks in the room. Eric, take it away.
All right, well, thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. I'm pleased to be here, and you could be watching the news tonight to see what the latest issue is that will get somebody excited. But I'm going to give a different take on this topic. How do I operate your advance is not working.
I think try the.
I need to be able to operate my slides.
Yes, you do. And page up. How about this? We're gonna have to do this. That's not too good, but.
Okay,
And
then let's go back.
one.
You just did the wrong thing.
All right.
Okay. All right. So everybody loves to complain about Congress. It's a national pastime. And a famous comedian, Will Rogers, said the country has come to feel the same about when Congress is in session as when a baby gets hold of a hammer. That's one of many things that Will Rogers said, making fun of Congress. And he said a lot of things that he didn't really say, but people quoted, making fun of Congress. So Congress's approval rating is about 20%. But does Congress deserve this disparagement that it always seems to get? Maybe that's just a function of what appears in the news. So here's what appears here's two pictures of Trader Joe's. So which one is more likely to see on the news? Almost all the time, the Trader Joe's parking lot looks like this over here on the left, right? But if it's going to make the news, it's because it looks like on the right. So if you were to watch the television news all the time, you might get the impression that this is what the Trader Joe's parking lot looks like. But in fact, you need to get a balanced picture. You need a baseline. So understand all of the shenanigans, all of the uproar about Congress. It's good to have kind of a baseline of how is it supposed to work? What's the everyday activity? What does the parking lot normally look like? So I had an opportunity a couple of years ago to go and serve in Congress and see for myself. So that's what I'm here to report on. Now, I can't say that I have a particularly balanced picture myself. Nobody has a balanced picture. Everybody has only their own particular experience. I happened to work at a particularly interesting time. It was during a time of COVID. It was a time in the topic that my office specialized in, had a lot of activity. So I'll share with you some of that. But and a lot of what I learned, I think, is actually publicly available information. It's something you could find out by looking in the library this library or reading online, except, or maybe even taking a civics class. But this is kind of a civics class of its own. But some of what I saw was was privileged because it was a staff level view. So I got to actually be in the room where something has happened. And so that was a special privilege for me, and that's what I like to share with you. Normal, the normal doesn't quite give you the adrenaline rush, but to understand what it's normally like is at least as important, if not more so, than the emergencies. So here's the outline for my talk. I'm going to just give you a little background about how I got there. The program that I was part of is called the AAA Science and Technology Policy Congressional Fellowship Program. Then I'll walk through the day in the life of what a congressional office is, how it works, what a congressman's workload is like, what they do. And then we'll dive into how the sausage gets made. First of all, we'll look in a little more depth in how the government is structured and why committees are such an important part of how Congress works. That's often overlooked. And as well, then we'll look a little bit more deep, and so I'll tell a few more stories about the press and lobbyists and how policy gets made. So that's the outline. So let's see, that's not it. Sorry, I'm gonna have to figure out how to operate this. There we go. All right, so let's start off with the setup. So I am a research scientist by profession. I work in artificial intelligence and cognitive science. And about 3 years ago, I learned about a program called the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program. What's going on here? You think that'll go away? I don't know. The AAAS, it stands for the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And so what this program is about is it brings scientists and technologists to Washington. I wonder if this could be under the control of the operator.
What's happening right now?
We are seeing an overlay on the top of the screen of some of the controls, the Zoom controls, says your screen sharing, stop share, participant is closed.
About that, is that better? I just clicked on something.
No, that's not really working. It's obscuring part of the slide. So let me go back and forward again. See if that helps. Click on which? I can't, unfortunately, I can't see that here. I don't see on the screen what is shown there. Let me exit presenter mode and see if that will, okay, let's see, screen sharing has stopped. Oh, this could make things worse. I'm going to share screen again.
Yeah. So what is it that you're seeing that is causing the, because I'm not seeing it here.
Okay, let's go to presenter mode again. Let's try again. Yeah, it's the Zoom. It seems like it's the Zoom. The Zoom control is what's doing it.
Hold on one second.
It says I am screen sharing.
Is that better?
No, it's not seeing anything.
Oh, there.
Oh, now we are.
Good now.
Okay, that's good. Don't touch anything on your end.
I didn't touch anything. I don't know what happened, but here we go.
Okay,
Okay.
maybe I did it on accident.
No worries. Carry on. All good.
Okay, so this is this program, the Science and Technology Policy Program, is designed to allow science experts come and contribute to policy making, basically in Congress. The entire program is about 150 fellows. Most of them end up in the executive branch and agencies and so forth, and about 30 end up in Congress. And I was actually sponsored by the IEEE, that's the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers. And when the AAAS gave me the swag hat, then the IEEE was jealous and they also got us a hat. And they pay a modest stipend so you can live in Washington. And you're basically free labor to the congressperson. The fellow gets to do some public service and learn about Washington, and then some people stay on to do staff jobs and actually go into agencies, which is a big win. So this is my cohort. There's this was taken in the middle of the summer, and not everybody could be there for the picture, but there are 30 of us, and we had some communication about, you know, what it was like in different offices. Most of the fellows end up in a Senate office. A few of them end up in a committee, and then I was in a House office.
The Zoom people are seeing this whole screen instead of your screen really big, so it looks like you're gonna have choice.
So what would you like me to do?
Try to change maybe the display settings or something, because right now what we're seeing is a tab where maybe you just try to share again. Sorry, attendees.
Okay, I'm
we're
going to
trying
share again. Let's see, maybe I need to share this one.
Before, what we on Zoom were seeing was the whole slide, and now we're seeing slide and then an option for notes and stuff like that.
How's this?
No,
As opposed to, we're saying.
Okay,
bear with us, folks.
Right, this is the technology part of the.
it was all
Yeah.
working when I got here, when you set it up. So I'm going to try one more time. How's that? You need to share again?
It's just not as big. We were, hold on, we're not seeing it yet.
Yeah, get your librarian who set it us up in the first place. She might know the magic to do. So that's not it, right?
No,
Zoom app down. Okay, and which should I watch? This one or this one? Yeah, come on over and do it if you know what to do. Make it work. And you want to go in presenter mode?
now we need to go to the whole big, yeah, we're close. This is better, but can you do the slideshow
Can you
thing?
do the presenter mode there?
This. Oh, is this a touch screen?
How's that look on your end?
This is what we're saying.
That's
That's the,
not it. It was better before the presenter mode.
Yeah, we don't want presenter mode because that shows the next slide and the notes.
You want to do slideshow. Oh, click up at the top on slideshow. There you go.
Yeah, we want slideshow.
From current slide.
Got it.
Oh, why is,
Right. There, but not here.
You know what? Just leave it at that. That's better. That's better right there. Just go with that.
Okay. That's fine. Sorry, folks.
I don't want to take too much time of Eric's talk. That's
okay.
This is what we're seeing now.
And what?
Yeah. Okay. You need to go forward.
well, I'm not sure that's going to let me go forward because that's not what I'm seeing here.
Oh,
Unless I try, let me try it this way. No, that's not it. We've got a totally different presentation there is here.
that's not good. Good one.
Okay, but that's just, that's the first slide.
And then
So if I go back into presenter mode, slideshow mode,
slideshow, wasn't it? And then share the screen.
well. So that's still not changing up there. Not sure where we're at here. What, is the librarian still here?
Yeah, I'll get her.
Yeah, get the person who set this up in the first place. I think she knew. She had some idea what to do. The slides are really important.
tap dance now, so that you tap, Eric? No. Anybody tap? You can do some. No. Pickleball. Oh,
Sure.
is there time steps? Single to anybody know how to tap? No?
Is that like, was it not working?
It was working for a while, and then we had some obscuration of the top of the screen, like that.
Yes, that.
So we're looking good on
But
Zoom.
we're also, yeah, we're also, you're showing the first slide, and I need to be able to navigate to later slides.
It's like it's disconnected from the.
So this I cannot get rid of because this
That's
is
okay.
you sharing your screen.
Now can you change slides? Okay. So it's changing
How is that on
slides.
Zoom? Is that okay?
It's good on Zoom.
Do you remember what
Let's go
slide you're
back.
on?
It's good on Zoom.
How do I go back? This way? Okay,
Yeah, you can use the arrows as well.
okay. Please do not advance past where I'm going to go. It's too late now. All right.
That's okay. Thank you.
I think we've lost it. We lost it again. Come back. Come back. You got to start us again here. All right, let's just see if this works. This is not,
Did you close the Zoom?
did I close the Zoom?
Yeah, we're not. we're only seeing
Okay.
you now. But we're not seeing
Maybe
you.
ask her to come back.
So the Zoom.
Wait, okay, do I have to go here to Zoom?
Go to the Zoom and then.
Well, we might have to, I don't know how we're going to be able to join us as her or what? Try that for Zoom. Okay, return to meeting. Let's see if that, is that? Okay, that's, looks like I might be on Zoom now. Okay, share screen. And which one do I want? This one? Okay, and now do we see, we don't see the presenter mode. Let's try presenter mode. All right, that looks like we're kind of fragile here. Let's see, how do I advance? Arrow, okay, arrow's working now, okay. Are we back in business?
Yes.
Looks great.
All right. We still got that,
Don't worry
that
about
stuff
it.
going on. I
Don't
think
worry
we're gonna have
about
to ignore that. All right, let's see, where was I? Oh, yes. So what time is it, by the way?
Yeah.
Oh. We've gone through about 5 minutes of,
Then we'll go back.
all right. So there was an elaborate placement process, you know, where you interview with different offices to figure out which one you're going to land in. So this was my boss. This is Honorable James Langevin. He was first elected to Congress in 2000. And he turns out he's a leader on cybersecurity policy. And I actually reported directly to his chief of staff, his legislative director and then chief of staff. And these guys were basically the leaders of cybersecurity policy on the congressional side and probably in the entire Congress. They're the powerhouse. And turned out 2021 was was a big year for cybersecurity in the United States. If you remember SolarWinds or Microsoft Exchange or JBS Meatpacking or Colonial Pipeline, these are all big cybersecurity events that happened on our watch. And so that was a big opportunity for the office to to take advantage of all the preparation they had done and have a really big impact. Now notice that Congressman Langevin is in a wheelchair. Turns out he is a quadriplegic. I think he's the first and maybe probably the only quadriplegic in Congress. He was in a shooting accident. He was 16 years old. He was a police cadet. Gun went off in the locker room, hit him in the spine, and he's paralyzed. He's got some use of his hands. His left hand is slightly better than his right hand, so he can control his wheelchair, and he can kind of eat by himself and kind of operate a computer with his hands. But he had to take a total detour in his career. And he went on to get a law degree, became Secretary of State of Rhode Island, and then was elected to Congress in 2000. So in order to do this, I mean, that says something about the strength of character of this gentleman. He turned out to be a man of extraordinarily smart and good with people. Most politicians are good with people. He's a decent orator. I wrote a lot of speeches in the office, and sometimes I was disappointed they weren't said as eloquently as I heard them in my mind, but still he did a decent job. He could go off the cuff. He's extremely generous and kind. He ran a very high functional office, and he's, like most Congress people, he's very partial to his district. He loved Rhode Island, went back every weekend, and just loved being there. So now that's my view. Other fellows had different experiences in different offices, and some of every office has its own character, which I'll talk a little bit more about. To give you an idea of what it's like, though, to be a congressperson, let's just look at a day in the life. And what you don't see from the daily news is how the office works, especially in terms of what the staff does. So it's important to realize that a congressperson is very, very busy. There are a lot of demands on their time. So other than, say, family time, for people who have a family in the Congress, they've got official proceedings, they've got a lot of meetings to do, and then they have their party and fundraising obligations. So their official job is to attend committee meetings, to attend committee hearings, and to do their work on the floor. That means voting and occasional speeches on the floor. So that occupies, when Congress is in session, that will occupy maybe half the day. But most of their time is spent with all kinds of other meetings. They have a lot of stakeholders, and the congressperson, a lot of people want to talk to them, and they want to talk to a lot of people. They're people. So they meet with their other members. They have to meet with, of course, their own office staff, then federal, state, and local officials. So a delegation comes from the county of San Mateo, tell what's going on in San Mateo, or maybe an agency that their committee is responsible for. They meet with the committee staff according to what the committee is going to do. So they meet with journalists. Sometimes the journalists come to them asking for questions, but then they want to get a story out. They love to meet with constituents. So you can, usually you make an appointment, but sometimes you can just walk in and the member will be glad to talk to you. And more likely, you're going to meet with community leaders and civic organizations, like maybe the head of the library, to talk about what's going on here. Business leaders, very important, industry and trade groups, and lobbyists. So the day, there's not enough hours in the day to fill up all the meetings the congressperson needs to do. Then they're also responsible for to the party and for fundraising. And one of the responsibilities is to raise money, so dialing for dollars. This is the least favorite task for most members. They hate doing this, but it's a requirement, especially if you want to rise in leadership and be in good stead with the leadership of your party. You have to deliver the money, especially if you're a senior person. Now, you're not allowed to raise money on federal property. So there's a Republican office building and a Democratic office building right across the street. And if you're going to raise money, you got to go across the street, and then you sit down and you dial for money. This also involves going to lunches and dinners and symposia and caucus meetings. So that's a lot of that. Your congressperson is very busy. Now, to get a sense of how that gets managed, it's worth looking at the structure of a Washington office. So this is a congressional office. A Senate office is quite a bit bigger because senators, there's only 100 senators, there's 435 representatives in the House. But it gives you a sense for who's, what the hierarchy is. So the member sits in their office, and that's where they can hold meetings with constituents and all the other people they have to meet with. Then in the middle here, we have the chief of staff and the scheduler. So the congressperson is overbooked. So they're constantly in touch with the chief of staff to figure out, okay, who should we have, who should we not? And the chief of staff should know what's on the congressperson's mind all the time, because they got to channel them and act as a surrogate, decide what belongs in the schedule, what doesn't. So that's a close operation. The chief of staff very often is a policy advisor, although sometimes they're more just the administrator. And one of the people in the legislative office would be the policy advisor. So in the legislative office, we have the communications director. So they're responsible for the tweets, the press releases, and for monitoring, hey, what are they saying about you? And often they're going to be involved with the policy as well, because the congressperson, depending upon what their role is that they take, they want to, communication is important through the press, and is important through meetings. The legislative team has a legislative director. This will be a more senior person who also is very much in line with what the member wants, what their agenda is. And then under them are a number of legislative assistants. The legislative counsel would be a lawyer if this office drafts legislation themselves. Otherwise, a committee drafts the legislation. Then when you walk in the front door, you have the receptionist or administrative assistant. And lower on the totem pole are the legislative correspondent. That's the person who answers the mail. And interns. So if you've ever seen a television or a movie set, or then you know that you've got the star of the show, right? And they're surrounded by people, right? You've got the director and the sound person and the makeup and the props. That's kind of like a congressional office. The job of the staff is to make sure the boss is prepared for whatever they need to do. I mean, you might have your own opinions, but your job is to make them effective. So that's what everybody has to understand what their role is. And that means help writing a lot of memos to prep the boss for the hearings and the votes and the right speeches. I wrote a bunch of speeches because my boss was called on to give speeches all the time. He loves to do it, but it's a lot of work. You research and analyze the legislation. You negotiate with other staff, like, okay, are you going to co-sponsor this bill or not? And you have to understand your member well enough to know what they would want to do so that you don't have to bother them with too many details. If you can, as much as the staff can handle, you try to take care of that yourself. The staff holds a lot of meetings themselves with constituents and lobbyists and officials, and they provide constituent services. I've described the Washington office. There's also going to be a district office. And the district office is where they take care of requests like, hey, where's my social security check? My income tax forms weren't received. How can I get my business through this regulatory process? So the district staff and the Washington staff coordinate on constituent services. And that's what most constituents see, unless they go to a town hall. And every member is really attuned to taking care of their constituents. So there's a lot of that work that goes on. And then there's also correspondence. So just to get more of a picture of what the staff is like, the House members are limited to 18 staff people. In the Senate, it could be around 100. So, most of those would be in the Washington office, some in the district office. So if you look at all the House members, all the senators, and the committees, there's about 14,000 staffers on the Hill. So that's because there's a lot to do to support all of these members. Each budget is relatively modest. So a House member gets about $1.3 million, a little more if you're farther away, if you've got extra expenses, if you're in an expensive district. But that's about $1.3 million to cover staff salaries mainly, but also travel, We rent for your district office, computers, and everything else. So that's a tight budget. The office I went in, they wouldn't even give me a laptop computer. They said, sorry, we can't afford it. I use my own laptop for the year. That breaks down to an average salary for congressional staff of about $30,000 to $60,000. Now, the senior people, the chief of staff, the legislative director, can make upwards of 150, and I think the limit is up to above 200,000 now. But not very many people are going to make that kind of salary. You have to be extremely senior and experienced. Most of the staffers are making not a lot of money for living in Washington, D.C., and therefore they're almost all very young. Most of the staff in our office were in their 20s. You can become a chief of staff by your early 30s if you're good. And so there's a lot of turnover, and there's a lot of competition. Now, why do people do it? It's because it's an adventure. You get to contribute to the nation, and you get to see how things happen and be a participant in it. So it can be a stepping stone for going to other places, for becoming senior staff, or going to agencies, or going to the State Department. Someone in our office went to join the civil service, the Foreign Service, or become a lawyer. But you have to be able to be very smart. And the people that were in the Langevin office, I have to say, they're the top people from their university, really, really smart and dedicated and energetic. Now, I know that that's not true of all offices. There are some offices where there are slouches, or they're just more haphazard. I interviewed for a different member who an office I didn't take, where a few years back, the chief of staff had been an extreme partisan, and they had done some really stupid things on social media and gotten the member in big trouble. And since then, that member had fired that staffer and hired on someone who was much more stable and senior. And so it was, by the time I got there, it was a well-run office. But that thing that previous chief of staff had done might have contributed to this particular member of Congress getting indicted and convicted of a felony for lying to the FBI, and he had to resign during about six months ago. So if your staff doesn't take care of you properly, you can get into trouble. But a good staff is worth everything. So they tell us, and I think this is true, that every congressional office is like its own small business. So it's run by the tone and the tenor set by the member themselves. So just like every business, you might have a strict authoritarian, you might have a very loosey-goosey. Every office has its own character and will be run differently. Then you can consider every member having their own style, and there's a bunch of dimensions by which any member might vary, might different. So some members are leadership of the conference, the committee, or the caucus. Others we call backbenchers, and they never have much visibility. The longer they're there, the more seniority they gain, and also their ability to speak and carry an argument gives them more influence. And a bunch of people don't have that much influence. There's going to be a distribution. Some members are really strictly with their party. They follow what the leadership says, vote this way on this and this way on that. That's our recommendation. Others are more rogues, and they want to do their own thing. Some members are inclined to be more bipartisan. My boss, Jim Langevin, tried to make sure that every bill he was on had sponsorship from the Republican side as well as the Democratic side. Others are very happy to be, just with their own party and to heck with the other side. Some members are more ideological. So, the extremes, as we know, that the Congress now is extremely polarized. There's a lot more people on the ideological extremes of the left and the right than maybe 30 years ago. Other members are more pragmatic. They say, listen, I'm willing to compromise because I want to get stuff done. Of course, every member specializes in their own topic, and that relates to the committee they're on. Some members are entirely focused on bringing home benefits to their district, while others can take the liberty to take on national affairs. So, Congressman Langevin, having being in a safe seat in Rhode Island, was able to have the luxury of paying attention to this national issue of cybersecurity, which he latched onto in the mid-2000s. He said he saw this was a coming thing, that in the information age, it's really important that our computer systems be secure, and nobody's paying attention to that in the government. So he's latched onto that in the mid-2000s and was able to stick with that issue for 15 years because he had a safe seat and he could afford that time to put his attention there as opposed to only paying attention to his district. Some members are more concerned with creating legislation, others more with oversight, and I'll talk about legislation and oversight in a minute. Some members are selfish. They want the limelight. They want to get credit for everything. Others, like Congressman Langevin, are very happy to give other people credit for the bills that come forward. He was extremely gracious. Some are very good at fundraising, and some are not. So what happens when you call your congressperson? Well, a member of Congress generally, they're there because they care about their district and they care about what the constituents think. So they do care what you when you call. But who you're going to reach, you're not going to reach your congressperson directly. They're very busy. Almost all important calls are scheduled. So if you just call up, your call is going to be answered by someone who's probably going to be lower on the totem pole. It's going to be the receptionist, the communications director, not the communications director, the legislative correspondent, and maybe one of the legislative assistants. So first thing they're going to want to know, is this a constituent or not? Because if you're not voting in that district, then what you say really is not what they're there to do. They're there to represent their district. So you can complain, but that doesn't matter that much. Next, you make a very quick assessment. Is this a reasonable person or are they a crank? Now, you might not be surprised by this, but Congress people get a lot of calls from irate constituents. People are angry about something. They just want to blow off steam. So what do you do if you're on the phone? You sit there and you listen patiently. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And what is your address? What is your name, please? Thank you. And your address, thank you. And you just wait for them to blow off the steam and then you let it go. So you've wasted someone's time if you call up unprepared with a really reasonable statement. Next assessment is the person requesting assistance for something where the government's supposed to be helping them, or are they just voicing an opinion? So if you've got a problem with your benefits check, then they'll try to connect you with somebody that'll help. But if you've got an opinion, then then they'll register your opinion. But it's important about the timing. So it could be a general opinion about something you care about, like the inflation issue. But there's nothing. If there's no legislation pending that's going to affect that, then that's not going to make a big difference. So what will really count is if you have something to say that pertains to a bill or an amendment that's now has to be decided on, then what the constituents say about that will really make a difference. But a lot of times that happens because they're organized calls. So you have a lobby group or an interest group that said, okay, I'm going to have a whole bunch of people in this district call up. And then you get these coordinated calls, all the callers are calling from the same script. That's going to count for a lot less than if it's a particular communication that you have drafted for yourself. So what happens at the end of the day is this call or email or letter gets tallied up, added to the tally. And if appropriate, there'll be a response sent back to the constituent. And then the member will learn about that. So like once a week, we'd have a staff meeting and the legislative correspondent would say, okay, these are the calls we've been getting this week. They care about, disability rights, and that's relevant. And so the congressperson will hear about it either through their staff, or if they're attending the meeting, they might hear it directly. So it makes its way through to them. But you have to remember that you are one person out of a district of several 100,000. So any one voice is unlikely to make a huge difference. But just like with voting, they can add up. Tell you a story, 1 week, for some reason, we were getting a whole lot of calls about the slaughter of horses, wild horses. There are no wild horses in Rhode Island. So this was puzzling to us. Why are we getting these calls about horses? Well, it turned out it was some event happening in Montana or Arizona where the Department of Interior said, hey, there's too many wild horses. We have to call the wild horses. And that got some association, some humane group in an uproar, and they blasted out an email to all the people who care about animals. And a whole bunch of Congress people got calls about wild horses. Not something we could have done anything about, but that's part of the job. All right. So now let's get more into how business really happens. I'll focus this around committees. So this is a picture of a committee hearing. Committees are less visible, but of greater importance than people realize. Now, we all know there's 3 branches of government, right? Executive, the House, and the Senate, right? Well, if you add about 50% of the people will say, yeah, those are the 3 branches of government. Now, the 3 branches of government, legislative, executive, and judicial. And they're structured with checks and balances. So the role of the legislative branch is to establish policy. That's what do the people want? So that's what their job is to create laws and then to create the means for the laws to be carried out. And that means create authorizations, which authorizes the executive branch to do stuff, and then appropriations means authorizes the executive branch to spend money. But the Congress has no power, no ability, no staff to actually implement the laws. All they do is say, these are what the laws are. Then they give it to the executive, and the executive's job is to actually carry out the policy. So you might think the president has a lot of power, but their job really is to do what Congress says. Congress says, you carry out the policy, and that's done through regulations, enforcement, and spending. The Congress can't spend directly. They can tell the executive, hey, here's some grant money, but you got to figure out how to get the grant applications read, what the criteria are, how to spend it. The Congress is generally smart enough to know that the laws should not be too specific, that you cannot micromanage the details of what the policy should be. So for example, the Congress might decide that there's a policy that if you're running a utility, a public utility, or then you should be reporting on the cybersecurity incidents that happen. You're responsible for telling the public that, hey, we're getting attacked by cyber hackers, we're at risk, these are the ones that got through or not. The utility won't want to disclose that information. But the legislature might decide it's in the public good for that to happen. But they can't micromanage how that happens. So they hand over the authorities to a regulatory agency who actually implements the policy. And if Congress can, they leave as broad a brush as possible for the agency to figure out the details, to revise their regulations, and to enforce it. However, the executive doesn't always doesn't carry out the policy the way the Congress wants. So therefore, the Congress's other role is oversight. So this creates a tension. The executive is supposed to be doing what the Congress wants, and sometimes they don't want to do what the Congress wants because they're overburdened, they don't have the money to pay for it, their priorities are different of the president. And so the Congress has to say, well, wait a minute, I want to make sure you're doing the right thing. And then the Congress has some levers they can apply to the agencies. They can say, we're going to make the law stronger, so you have to do it in more detail. We're not going to give you money. We're going to give the money to a different agency that will do it the way we want. We're going to embarrass you by telling journalists about what a bad job you're doing. So there's a lot of things that Congress does through the oversight process to make sure that its policies get carried out. by the executive. All right. And then at some point, the judicial system comes in and it has to adjudicate the laws. All right, so this is a really big job because the government is really, really big. So if you look at the legislative branch, 14,000 staffers, then the members themselves. Judicial branch, I'm not sure how many people. The executive branch, it's got about roughly 3 million people, I think, are employees there. So this is where most of the government lives, and it's split among these 15 departments. They're all departments that you've heard of because they all do things that Congress, through policy, through the people, have decided, hey, this is important. We take care of this map. Agriculture, commerce, defense, education, Department of Energy, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, Housing and Urban Development, Interior, that's like the public lands, Justice, Department of Justice, Department of Labor, Department of State, that's Foreign Affairs, Transportation, Treasury, and Veterans Affairs. So the government is big because these are all important things, and each of these departments has got its agencies under it. And there could be anywhere from 2 to a dozen of agencies. Many of the agencies are ones you've heard of. I'm just going to dive into the agencies under the Department of Homeland Security because my boss was on the Homeland Security Committee, so I have some familiarity with that. So the Department of Homeland Security itself has got 12 agencies: the Coast Guard, Transportation Security Administration. These are people who check at your bags at the airport. Disaster Assistance and Secret Service is under Homeland Security, Immigration, and my boss was particularly interested in the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. This is I think the youngest agency in the government. It was created in 2018, largely through the work of Congressman Landrigan and some of his other colleagues who said, hey, cybersecurity is so important, it needs to have its own agency. So that's something he's been working on for a long time, and it's got about 2,500 people in it right now. So just to dive into that agency, it has a lot of responsibility of its own. Cybersecurity, energy, emergency communications, and infrastructure security. And this is the system of cybersecurity, infrastructure security. It's got a bunch of offices itself. And so when you're a member of Congress, you're going to specialize in whatever it is the topic that your committees put you on. So you're going to have to get to know pretty clearly what's going on in this agency. So I was able to staff a bunch of calls that my boss had with various people in these agencies trying to say, hey, what's going on? Do you have all the authorities in the law that you need to do your job to check on the companies and the industries to make sure their cybersecurity is intact or not? Do you have enough money to staff your positions? Are you effective at staffing your positions? Are there any things we should change? Are you doing the thing we told you to do last year? So there's kind of a give and take, and the oversight function sometimes means coming down and putting pressure on the agencies. So they didn't always want to take our calls because maybe they thought we'd see that they weren't carrying out everything we told them we wanted them to do. But they're intended to be responsive to the Congress. So with this much work to do, and imagine every one of those 15 departments, a dozen agencies in every one, that's why the federal government is so huge. In order to manage that from the legislative side, the policy side, we have committees. So the House side has got about 20 committees. The Senate side has counterpart committees, and these roughly line up with the departments, but not entirely. These are committees that you might have heard of: agriculture, appropriations is money; armed services, the military, the budget, education and labor, and so forth. And the Senate has their own set of committees. So every member gets committee assignments, and that's where they're going to specialize in knowledge in. Now, because the government is so big and there's so much history, it's really important that the member and their staff have some knowledge about what's going on, and they're not, if they come in fresh, they can get rolled, they can get snowed by some agency head who just tells them a story, and if the member doesn't know any better, then they're just going to, they won't do appropriate oversight, they won't have a way of evaluating it. So there's really an important role for having committee staff be there for a long time and have a lot of expertise, and the members themselves, at least some of them having enough seniority that they've been around for a while and they know really what the details of how every agency is supposed to work. Now, some of the committees are more prestigious than others, especially appropriations is a very popular committee because that handles the money. So that gives you a lot of power because everybody wants money for their district. So you might be able to get votes for things you want if you're willing to appropriate money for somebody's district. That's how some of the horse trading works. The Rules Committee is another one you hear a lot about because there's a lot of procedure and rules and how legislation and oversight happen. And the committee that sets the rules for what amendments get considered, what bills get bundled together when they appear on the floor, that could have a lot of influence on whether some piece of policy passes or not, if you can set the rules for that. Now, the committees, being power centers, have competition among themselves for power. So there's a lot of competition for jurisdiction. Every topic that comes before Congress gets assigned to a committee. In the Senate, it's assigned to one committee. In the House, it's assigned to multiple committees by the House or the Senate parliamentarian. The parliamentarian is a staff person, not elected, who decides, well, this is how, this is the scope of the jurisdiction of different committees. And the committees are always fighting for more power under their control. So they're often very jealous of one another, and they will have a fight about topics. So one thing that happened was we had wanted a particular provision in the National Defense Authorization Act that we had negotiated with the Senate side. We got an agreement. Okay, here's a provision that we can agree on. We want to appear in a bill. And it was sent over from the Senate side to the House side, where it would have to be signed off by the committees in the House before it could be voted on the floor and it could be passed by the House. And the parliamentarian had, their old parliamentarian had resigned, had retired. And there was a new parliamentarian in who was doing wacko things. And for some reason, this particular amendment got assigned to the Financial Services Committee. And it had nothing to do with financial services. Why did it get sent there? We don't know. So my boss spent a weekend on the phone trying to find out, who do we know on financial services? Who can we leverage to tell them, don't block this amendment. It's a good amendment, just take it and let it go through, clear the committee so we can bring it to the floor and not get in the way of our provision for the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. So that's why relationships are really important. Who you know, so that they can trust you that if you say, hey, please sign off on this or block that, that you're liable to get your way. All right. Okay. A lot of the work of committees is done at the staff level if possible. So it's interesting. It's a very hierarchical place. So I talk to my boss from time to time, my congressman, but I almost never talk to any other member of Congress. It's the members talk to each other at that level. And then there's a staff level conversation. But I wouldn't talk to the chief of staff of some other office. I'd only talk to someone at the legislative assistant level or maybe the legislative director level at most. So as much as possible, the committee staff and the office staff try to work together, and then the heavy guns, the members, are only called on if necessary. And if that happens, then something has gone haywire. So there's a lot of jealousy between the committees, and whether the committees get along depends largely on whether the members get along. And the members of the committee, the committee is mostly ruled by the chair of the committee. So who is the chair of the committee is very important. And right now, we have a new Congress, 118th Congress. So you hear a lot in the news about what are the committee assignments going to be. And so if you watch that, then you find out that that's where those are the members who are going to have the most power. The committees are controlled by the majority party. So majority, minority is a very important concept. If the Democrats have the most votes, they're the majority. If the Republicans have the most votes, they're the majority. So the committee's breakdown is going to be 2/3 of the staff will be the majority, 1/3 the minority, more votes for among members for the majority than the minority. So the majority party controls what the committee does. So if you've got committee members that are collegial and get along with the minority, then the committee is likely to be highly functional. But if you have a lot of polarization, then you're going to have a dysfunctional committee. Committees are also responsible for oversight. So that's done through the hearings. A hearing is when there's testimony from witnesses, and those are organized by the majority party. The witnesses come in about some topic to say what they have some expertise. And then there's 5 minutes per member to ask questions. And it's very interesting. You can see a lot of difference between the members about how they behave in committee hearings. Some of them are very well prepared. Either their staff or the committee staff will have prepared questions for them, and they might just read through the questions or have their even better, have their own questions based on the testimony. Other ones come in and they just wing it. Maybe they haven't been paying attention, or they just have some topic on their mind that they want to get something off their chest, or maybe they want to make the news, so they say something inflammatory so that they'll make the headlines. So the behavior, and it can surprise you, people that you hear in the news as being bomb throwers, I've seen behave very responsibly in committees, asking very intelligent questions. And conversely, people you think are serious thinkers might come in there totally unprepared and just say something totally off the wall. You can watch all this happen yourself, by the way, because it's all public. At least all the hearings and open meetings are public. You can go to congress.gov and you can tune in to the House floor, to the Senate floor, and every open committee hearing. And there's a lot of them. There's more than you can keep track of. And sometimes it's just worthwhile to sit all the way through a hearing and just to see how it all goes, to learn about what the functionality is of the committee. All right, so let me outline next a few more things about how the sausage gets made. So I did mention leadership. The leadership is really important because, if you've got a very diverse country that sends a whole bunch of people from very diverse backgrounds to make policy and do oversight, to get them to get along, it's going to be like herding cats. You're probably going to have to develop some hierarchical structure. Some people who are more in charge, who set the policy priorities and are able to give rewards and punishment to keep people more in line. So we talk about leadership as being either strong leadership or weaker leadership. That is, do they get the members from their own caucus, their party, to follow along with what the leadership wants, or are the people just all over the wall, all over the map, do what they want? You've got majority party leadership and minority party leadership, and that's got some sort of structure to it. And the leadership exercises its authority by putting bills on the floor or not, depending upon whether a member is a good behaving member or not, by assigning committee chairs and subcommittee chairmanship. And another center of power is caucuses. Now, so we hear about strong and weak leadership. Nancy Pelosi was known as being a very strong leader. That meant that she made sure that she and her team, Steny Hoyer also, and Hakeem Jeffries, the team made sure that the Democrats on the floor, when a vote needed to be had, they would go along with the vote as the leadership wanted. And that sometimes made the rank and file members a little upset. I know that there was a time when we had wanted $20 million to be inserted into a bill because we wanted to fund the National Cyber Director, which is a position that was authorized that the White House needs to have a director of cybersecurity, but they need to have an office of about 75 people and it take about $20 million. In the scheme of things, that's not a huge amount of money. It should have been a small matter for the leadership to say, okay, we're going to put $20 million into this bill so that you can get the National Cyber Director, because we understand that you, Jim Landrigan, think that's important and you're the cyber guy. Didn't happen. Why? Because, well, some people would say Nancy Pelosi and her leadership team, they're prima donnas. They don't pay attention to what their rank and file really needs. They just do whatever on their mind. So there's some resentment that can go on. On the other hand, it was a very effective Congress, and almost always when a tough vote came around, the member would vote with the leadership or be persuaded to, or else they'd have a good reason not to, and they'd have an understanding with leadership about why they had to take an opposing vote, and they come into accommodation about how they would make up for that in some other capacity. In contrast, we're learning that Kevin McCarthy, new Speaker of the House, has weak leadership, and that's because he has a very small majority in the Congress, and he apparently has a lot of people who are rogues, who don't care what the party leadership wants. They want to go their own way, they have their own agenda, and they're willing to buck the leadership to throw a monkey wrench into operation. So we'll see how that plays out. Because the executive is Democrat and the Senate is run by Democrats, it's unlikely that much of the Republican legislation coming through the House would get passed anyway. So I don't think people had much expectation that Republican interests would be able to carry through to law unless they were bipartisan and had made deals with Democrats. Now, there's some things that have to be done that require bipartisan cooperation, and it remains to be seen now. We're going to find out whether a weak leadership of the majority party is able to accomplish anything in collaboration with a very well-organized minority, and then other House, the Democrats in the other houses. So that says something about how things get done. So we were taught in how to be an effective member of Congress. So we were taught in our orientation, and I think this is really true, that there are 3 P's that determine how effective a member is going to be: policy, politics, and procedure. So policy is the stuff that the member wants to get done. These are their interests in the policy areas, the topics that they care about and their committees care about. And this is the stuff you can have good faith debates about. There's uncertainty about what the outcomes will be if you raise taxes or lower taxes or put in a regulation, should have less regulation. These are what you want to accomplish. But and of course, there's a diversity of interests. So this has to be hashed out in a democracy. But that happens largely through politics. So politics often has a bad name, but because, oh, that's just politics. But what politics really means is the art of getting people to get along. That means getting people to understand each other's interests and come to an accommodation so that no one is too unhappy. So everybody stays on the same ship and rows, even if they're not rowing quite as hard as the other people on the ship. Everybody gets something. So that means a lot of understanding where everybody stands, what everybody needs for their district, for their own interests, and negotiating and maintaining relationships. The third part of effectiveness is procedure. So I mentioned a parliamentarian, the House rules. There's a lot of rules about how the bodies operate, about how bills get sent through committees, how amendments get made, how they get discharged, reported back to the floor, how the votes are organized, how the conferences between the House and the Senate work. So there's a lot of details there, and if you master the details, then you know how to work the levers to make things happen in the order you need in order to get the politics to work for you and the policy to work for you. So somebody who's a master tactics like well, Harry Reid in the Senate or Mitch McConnell or Harry Schumer in the Senate know how to operate all the rules of the Senate, and similarly on the House side, to finally get the politics to come together to get the policies that enough people can agree on. Well, so the three Ps have to work in this gravitating bodies of the House and the Senate and the executive. So as we know, we've got the House and the Senate. The legislature is supposed to establish policy and the executive is supposed to carry out policy. So that creates some automatic tension about whether about oversight and are you doing what the policy says. And then there's an automatic tension between the House and the Senate, each other. Each chamber thinks it's the best. The House is close to the people. The Senate is the wise seniors that are more moderated. And there's often frustration between the House and the Senate. I mean, I've heard people tell me, if we could just make the Senate go away, things would go a lot. And I'm sure the senators feel the same way about the House, unruly House members. So there's this dance. And part of the dance is also about who is in control, the majority party, the minority party. Are they Democrats or Republicans? Democrats or Republicans. And is the executive Democrat or Republican. So that says who's going to be aligned with one another on policy. And you still got to work out the politics and the procedures. So in a case where the House and the Senate and the executive are all the same party, that's your best bet for getting coherent things, legislation through. And that can still be difficult. And we saw in the last session of Congress where the House had a slim majority Democrat, the Senate a very slim majority Democrat, and the executive, Joe Biden, with very low approval ratings, was still able to get stuff done. Now that the Senate has flipped to majority Republican, it's going to be a very different dynamic between how these bodies work together. So you're probably going to likely see a lot more opposition and contention between the Senate side, controlled by Democrats, and the House side, controlled by Republicans. And it will remain to be seen whether they can come together to pass some of the bills that have to be passed, like the budget ceiling and the National Defense Authorization Act. Finally, there's another piece of this, which is the people, and who operate largely on a day-to-day basis through the press. What gets reported about what's happening, and what the people write in to put in their blog postings and put a post on Twitter about what they see happening. So that's a very important story in its own right about how the press works. And one thing I learned is that the press is bigger than you think it is. So when I think of the press, at least here in the San Mateo County, I think of the mainstream press as being maybe Axios, Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, and then all the major news channels. And then you have the partisan side. You have Fox, and you have MSNBC, and you have The Nation, and you have National Review. So you have press that is considered mainstream and outside. But there's a lot more of the press that matters to people in Congress. These matter a lot, absolutely. But then you also have a part of the press that's devoted directly to the Beltway, the people who are working in government. Best known is probably Politico. That's pretty widely read. But then there's also ones that pertain just to Congress, The Hill and Roll Call. Anybody ever heard of those two publications? Yeah, so that's reports directly on, hey, what's going on in the House and the Senate. And then there are a number of publications that are concerned more generally with the federal government. The Defense One pertains to the military. NextGov, FCW. And then going beyond that, we have actual trade publications about particular topics. So these might not be just within the Beltway. Like there's a trade publication about dentistry, about information tech, about manufacturing, about furniture, right? About marketing. All of these industries have their own interests that if you're a member of Congress or in an agency that deals with that topic, you're going to care what's going on there. And I have to say, we learned a lot about cybersecurity, what's going on in the cybersecurity world, through the trade press. So we really depend on them, the press, just to know what's going on in the world so that we could do our jobs effectively. There's a lot of blogs about cybersecurity, but we don't have time to read all those. So we count on these journalists reporting to us. Then there's some in between. So these are kind of beltway, but also more specified. And Bloomberg turned out to be a really important news source. They had their own government branch that feeds, that we had a subscription to. Very comprehensive reporting. They have databases. They cover more than you see in the picture. So I've got the opportunity to brief the congressman, staff, a number of interviews. It's kind of interesting. Your congressperson is very busy. They might come out of a very heated committee meeting and they have 10 minutes. Now you're appearing for this journalist in 10 minutes. So that prep is very important. The legislative director or the chief of staff will say, okay, here's your talking points. This is what you want to cover. Are they telling the member what to do? No, because they already know what the member wants. The member is already in alignment with them about what the message is, but how to carry out that message, exactly what the talking points will be drafted by a staffer. The member has to absorb that and be ready to hit those talking points in this interview. Sometimes, you'll see this a lot. The journalist comes in with some questions. The member has a different agenda about what they want to get across. And so they'll just kind of steer and answer from their talking points instead of the journalist questions. And the journalists are usually gracious and they will just move on. They won't, sometimes they'll pursue it, but sometimes they say, okay, I understand. And then they'll try, they'll thank the member for their time and write a story anyway. So we got to know, for our area of interest, cybersecurity, we got to know the journalists very well. We followed their stories. We made sure that they were happy by feeding them stories. So it's a two-way street. Sometimes you want to get a message out. You say, hey, we got a story for you. Sometimes the journalists come to you and say, we want to know about this story. And sometimes you want to talk about this story. Sometimes you don't, and you try to deflect. Interesting story about classified information and reporting tradecraft. So my boss was on the Armed Services Committee. He had a security clearance. He spent a lot of time in his SCIF, the Secure Compartmentalized Information Facility. He knew a lot of secrets. Chief of Staff also has security clearance. And I think our military fellow had a security clearance and the military legislative assistant did. So he knew a lot of stuff that he's not supposed to talk about. Now, one day we heard, he's going to do an interview with Ellen Nakashima. Ellen Nakashima is a lead, very top, high-level cybersecurity and national security reporter for the Washington Post. What she writes, people pay attention to. And my supervisor, chief of staff, heard that, you agreed to do an interview with Ellen Nakashima? Uh-oh, I'm scared. Why? Because a really good reporter.
The library will be closing in 15 minutes. The public computers will be shutting down in less than 10 minutes. Please release your print jobs and ask your final questions at this time. Thank you.
A very good reporter can find out information that they're not supposed to know, that's classified, and they'll kind of weave that into the question, the conversation, kind of the context for a question. And if the member who knows this stuff just passes by and accepts it as a given, a premise of the question, then they've revealed something that that this reporter is not supposed to know. So you have to be really on your guard if you're talking to a top-notch reporter about sensitive topics. So there's a push and pull. There's also a matter of leaks. Now, leaks we think are bad because it's like sharing things you're not supposed to share, but they're also can be for the public benefit because there's things that are official that are not necessarily not a state secret or anything, but they're not generally open to the public. But at times you want to feed a report or a story in order to make something happen that's in the public interest. So at one point we after the Colonial Pipeline was shut down due to a cyber attack, we were following up on whether the Pipeline Security Administration in the Department of Transportation, because pipelines are considered transportation. So this cyber operation is not in CISA, not in Department of Homeland Security, it's in the Department of Transportation. We thought these people are not doing their jobs, making sure the pipeline operators are keeping their cyber controls in order. And we wrote a letter to them to say, explain to us how you're following the law that you're supposed to make sure you're holding the feet to the fire of all these pipeline operators to make sure they've got their cyber security in order. And we thought they weren't responsive enough. So we wrote the letter, waited for an answer, and we were prepared to leak the letter to the press to embarrass them, because that would make them maybe do what they want. Now, a lot of people think people are motivated by money in Washington. Oh, you go to Congress and you scam the system and you make a lot of money. By and large, that's not the case. Yeah, maybe there are some people who are like that. By and large, what motivates a congressperson or the public officials is their own sense of self-worth and prestige at being a big shot, at accomplishing things, having power, at being regarded well. So their own reputation counts for a lot. So if you embarrass an agency, then the head of that agency is not going to want to see that in the papers. People might ask him questions at parties that they don't want to hear. So there's a lot of leverage that Congress has, or the press, just by exposing information in the right ways, in the right order. All right, I think I have one more slide about lobbyists. A lobbyist is also something that there's a lot more nuance than you think. I mean, we all, out in the countryside, most people think lobbying is terrible because that's how the special interests get their way and the normal people don't get what they want. Now, I think that a different viewpoint is that lobbying is part of the democratic process, because what it involves is the collection of some interest group to have a common voice, to try to magnify their voice before the deliberative bodies, the legislature. And that's a legitimate thing. I mean, if you're a dog lover and you want to have policy around dogs, then there could be a dog organization that might have lobbying in Washington, and that's fair game. I mean, and where it becomes unfair is where there's undue influence, where what the lobbying organization does, if they have money that gets used in irresponsible ways, then that can be bad. But most of the lobbying that I saw was basically information sharing. And actually, lobbyists can do a great service because they're specialists in their topic. So they know things that the members and the staff, especially the young staff, we don't have the history. We don't know about the history of the cybersecurity policy in cyber pipelines. So the lobbyists who know about that can share information to help the policy making. Now, they're going to give a one-sided view. So you want to always make sure you get other sides, but that can be beneficial. And for my last story, I'll just tell you a story of a lobbying meeting. It kind of gives, I think, a flavor of how these things go. This is a meeting we had with the company it was a civic company in their lobbying organization. The company is called Medallia. Medallia is a company in San Mateo, and what they make is customer satisfaction and customer tracking software.
Good evening. The library will be closing in 10 minutes. The public computers will be shutting down in less than 5 minutes. Please pick up the items that you are borrowing at this time. For those using laptops, please power down the computer. Thank you.
So if you go to a CVS and they send you a survey, you look at the survey, you'll see it's run by Medallia. So Medallia has some good technology for running surveys, for taking natural language input. You can just type at it, or you can even video your comments. And they will collect that and aggregate it and tell the management of the company, hey, how are your customers feeling about your products and your service and what your store looks like and so forth. So Medallia wanted to get into some government business. They said these tools are very useful for providing better government services. And they had the idea that, they could be useful in the military. Because it turns out, and I didn't realize this, when you're not at war, the function of every military commander is force readiness. That means make sure the people under their command are ready to go, and they're always doing training and maintenance preparedness. And they are responsible for reporting to their commanders, okay, how ready are we in case you're needed for something. So part of force readiness is making sure that the people under the command, the soldiers, are happy and satisfied. They have good morale. And we've had an epidemic of bad morale on military bases. We've had sexual harassment, and we've had disillusionment, suicides, vandalism on the part of soldiers. So this job of keeping track of what the tenor is like on these bases is very important. And Medallia thought you could use our survey software to make sure you find out bad situations before they happen. So they engaged with a lobbying group to approach Congress to try to get some language put into a bill that would create a pilot project for inserting Medallia software into some military feedback operations. And the lobbying group it was a very small operation, had two guys. It had the main lobbyist, and then it had the front man. And the front man was a guy named Dan Lundgren, who used to be Attorney General of California, and then he was a member of Congress. And his job is to have the relationships with the members, to get the meeting. So he'll call up an office, hey, it's Dan Lundgren, and let me talk to the boss. Oh, sure, old times. And so he'll get the meeting to happen. And then the lobbyist himself is the brains of the operation, who does a strategy. Okay, who are the members we need to approach? What are the bills we want to attach to? When is the timing? And let's set up the meeting, and let's draft bill legislation. And then they brought a fourth person who was someone from the Veterans Administration who would actually use the Medallia software and was extremely excited about it and said, I vouch for this. I'm willing. I think you should have this in the military. So we had the meeting in the congressman's office, and he had what's called a hideaway, his own office in the Capitol. And he had 15 minutes. He was between votes. The whole 15 minutes was Dan Lundgren and Jim Langevin just kicking around old times. The man from the company, the government affairs guy, barely got a chance to tell his story about what they're offering. So the congressman himself never really heard the story. That was left at the staff level. But he briefed the staff. And so we had to make our assessment. Is this something we wanted to do or not? We want the congressman to put this language into the bill or not. And the congressman would trust us to probably make the right decision on that. And so the way it worked out is it really belonged in a different person's lane. Actually, Jackie Spear was the person who was the right person to handle this issue. So it didn't really go anywhere. But the function of the lobbyist was to get the meeting, to strategize how do we want to position our legislation, and to put the best case forward about why what they're offering was a good thing for the government. And often it's true. We learned a lot from different lobbyists or the companies that the lobbyists brought in to tell us about cybersecurity tools. So it's a mixed deal. All right, so that covers the ground I wanted to pretty much. Just to summarize, a congressperson has a very demanding job. To do it well, a lot of demands on your time. Every office is like a small business. So every office has its own character, the personality set by the member. Some of them are highly functional, some of them highly dysfunctional. But the staff does a heck of a lot of the work to support them. Second, the federal government is very big and complex. The executive runs it, but Congress is the people who say this is what we want and make sure it happens. So this checks and balances design requires Congress to be able to reach in and see what's going on, and that's why we have committee structure, and the committees are more important than most people realize. So pay attention to what committee our new congressperson, Kevin Mullen, what committee he ends up on. That's what he's going to pay a lot of attention to, and that's where our voices will have a lot of effect if we influence him. And then how things get done is policy, politics, and the arcane procedure of Congress. And it's a tug of war among competing interests. And you have to be able to cooperate with other people. And that's what the politics is. And if you have different interest policy and you try to run the procedure get your way. All right, so that gives us about 5 minutes, and I'm really happy to take questions or comments.
We had
Yes.
one online, which was how did the parliamentarians chosen, how are they chosen?
Good question. I'm not sure. I think you have to look that up. I think it's by the leadership, basically leadership, but I'm not sure.
About who goes into what committee, how do you know?
The leadership, the committee assignments are by the leadership.
Oh.
So that's why you want to keep your leadership happy, because you want to have good committee assignments. Or if you're Marjorie Taylor Greene, you have a big hammer where you can threaten the leadership and they'll put you on a good committee, even if you haven't earned it. You have no expertise in the committee. Yes, sir.
Are most of the votes partisan, or is there a lot of back and forth?
Oh, I'm sorry, which?
Are most of the committee votes, do you have different partisan line?
It depends. The committee votes can be, depends on what the topic is. Largely, they're going to be party line votes. But there are some topics where you can get everybody on board and you might have a different kind of split.
So is that committee chair is appointed by
Yes, by House. Yes, the House and Senate leadership is who appoints the committee chairs. The subcommittee chairs are done by either the leadership or in conjunction with the committee leader. So yeah, there's a lot of negotiating going on right now about who's going to get assigned to what committee. How much money have you raised? Okay, what's your seniority level? Often it goes by seniority. That's usually the default, but who gets to be in the first place so they can gain the seniority, or whether you overrule the seniority is up to the leadership.
I think they're trying to get rid of us here in the library, so thank you, Eric. Thanks everybody for coming. Next month, we'll have a talk from a geologist about earthquakes. So if you want to come, we'll look out for that. The second Thursday of the month.
Yeah. Yeah. But